This week on the Writers Detective Bureau, VPNs, my personal story, and the Police Academy. I'm Adam Richardson, and this is the Writers Detective Bureau. Welcome to episode number 30 of the Writers Detective Bureau, the podcast dedicated to helping authors and screenwriters write professional quality, crime-related fiction. 30 weeks. Man. That's a long time to stick with this. I'm glad I'm having fun. I hope you guys are as well. I want to thank Gold Shield patron Deborah Dunbar from deborah.dunbar.com and Coffee Club patrons Joan Raymond, Guy Alton, Natasha Badgema, Natalie Borelli, Joe Trent, Siobhan Pope, Leah Cutter, Ryan Kinmill, Richard Phillips, Robin Lyons, Jean Desrochers, Craig Kingsman, Kate Wagner, Rebecca Jackson, and Marco Carocari. Your support keeps the lights on in the Bureau. Please support all of these awesome authors by visiting their author websites and reading their books. You can find links to their websites in the show notes at writersdetective.com/30. And if you have your own author business, consider joining Patreon. It's free for you, and it allows your readers to support you financially through monthly micropayments. Give your fans a chance to show their support by creating your own Patreon account right now. To learn more, visit writersdetective.com/Patreon, Patreon. My first question this week comes from Roz Guji. Roz writes, "My killer hides behind VPN when sending messages to a newspaper, so they aren't able to track where they come from. And he trips up, I think, by sending a message from his phone. It's a new phone, so I say he hasn't set up VPN on it. Can you set up VPN on a phone? Or is it easier for police to trace where a phone message comes from?" Great question, Roz. For listeners unfamiliar with VPNs, VPN stands for Virtual Private Network. To understand how a VPN works, we need to start with a basic understanding of how we connect to the internet. Whether you're connected via an Ethernet cable from your cable modem to your desktop, or Wi-Fi to your laptop, or using an app on your cell phone, the device you're using has an IP address. And IP stands for Internet Protocol Address. So this address is a series of 2 or 3-digit numbers separated by decimal points. And those numbers will range anywhere between 0 and 255. So an IP address might look something like 199 decimal point 34 decimal point 228 decimal point 79. So if you send an email or visit a website using a regular old internet connection, the recipient of the email or that website host will be able to see what your IP address is. For an email, your IP address will be listed in the header. Now, many of you are thinking, what's a header? That's something that you can turn on to make visible using your email program, but it's definitely there for any email that's sent or received. So if you go into your email program and turn on headers, you will see what I'm talking about. So for a website, the web host logs the IP addresses of every connection that's made to the website. So email and websites are going to see your IP address. Equally as important, it's possible for anyone in that chain between your computer or phone and the email recipient or the website that you're visiting can potentially see what you're sending or receiving. And this is because your connection is unencrypted. This can become an issue if you're using a public Wi-Fi access point, like in the gate area of an airport while you're waiting for a flight, or in a coffee shop. And hackers can use your unencrypted connection to the Wi-Fi to get access to things like your Facebook username and password. Anyway, getting back to the IP address thing. Your IP address is linked to the internet service provider you're connected to. So if a kidnapper sends an email ransom letter, I, as the detective, can look at the sender's IP address and the date and time of the message. Now, I should mention that IP addresses change all the time, usually, but your IP address is unique to your device for the date and time that it's connected. So no one else is using that IP address when you're the one using it. So I would look up which internet service provider owns the IP address used by the sender of that ransom letter using a whois search, which is literally one word, WHOIS. So let's say the whois search reveals that the IP address belongs to Verizon Wireless. I would then obtain a search warrant or a subpoena, or in the case of a kidnapping, I might be able to explain the exigency of the situation and why waiting on a search warrant could jeopardize our kidnapping victim's life. Anyway, I would serve Verizon Wireless with whatever paperwork they required, that exigent circumstance request, the search warrant, or the subpoena, to find out which account was using that IP address on that date and time. So Verizon would then reveal that Adam Richardson's Verizon Wireless account was using that IP address at that date and time. And if I worded my search warrant or subpoena or exigent circumstance request correctly, Verizon might also provide my billing address. Or if it was a cable company that provides broadband internet service, like through a cable modem, they might provide the address of the service location. In other words, the street address of where the cable modem is located. Doing an IP address whois search may also reveal the general location of the IP address, either a city and state or a general region within a country. This is how the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation, knows if you're in the UK and prevents you from streaming the latest shows on their website. This is also the reason why some of the ads that you see target you based on mortgage lenders in Los Angeles, California. That's how they know where you're located. It's based off of your IP address. So that's a very basic explanation of how IP addresses work and then how we as detectives use them in our investigations. So getting back to Roz's question about VPNs, using a VPN service accomplishes a few things with regard to your IP address and the traffic you're generating with your internet use. First, it creates an encrypted tunnel between your device and the VPN service. So that means Verizon, or whatever the internet service provider is, can't see what you're doing on the internet, what websites you're visiting, or the content of your emails. It's all encrypted. Second, you get to choose where you want your IP address to resolve to. So the VPN service will give you options on where you want your encrypted tunnel to appear to be from. So if I'm in California and I turn on my VPN, I can choose to have my VPN make my IP address be one that resolves to London, England. The VPN service tunnels my internet connection to London, and the VPN server in England assigns me one of their IP addresses located in London. So now I can watch shows on BBC. Or in the case of Roz's character sending letters to the newspaper, it can look like the IP address is coming from nearly anywhere around the world. Many VPN companies try to protect their customers' privacy by refusing to keep connection logs of who used their service and when. So as the detective investigating the case, and I determine the IP address resolves to a VPN company, I will still serve them with a search warrant or a subpoena, but I'll expect very little information in return. My next investigative step, especially if I have an idea as to who the suspect might actually be, would be to serve a search warrant on the suspect's bank or credit card companies and look for a transaction from that suspect to the VPN company. So it's not going to prove that he sent the email, like that ransom email, but it will be useful indirect evidence or circumstantial evidence when it comes to trial. So this is one of the reasons why Bitcoin is popular. A lot of VPN companies will accept Bitcoin payments in an effort to then make even the payment be anonymous. So if you're looking to have a character get away with it and use VPN successfully, you could certainly have them pay with Bitcoin. Or if you want to get them caught and make it plausible, you can have them pay with their own credit card. Now, a word of caution when it comes to the type of story you're writing. What I'm talking about here, like what we've just been talking about, is obviously crime fiction. It's how the police or the FBI interact with VPN providers. This scenario is the real result of how criminal investigations would work and how we would deal with it when it came to proving circumstances in court. Now, you'll notice that I didn't mention the NSA or the CIA or any of that kind of stuff. If you're writing a story about spying or national security or the intelligence community, those results may differ quite drastically from what we just talked about. The reason being is that those agencies aren't limited by rules of evidence or arguably the Bill of Rights because they aren't acting as enforcers of the law. And what I'm about to say is pure inference from public open source reporting, and it's not from any kind of inside knowledge that I have personally, but mainly based on the July 2018 indictment of the Russian hackers into the election by the U.S. Justice Department. So it's clear that the U.S. has the technical ability to see, it seems like, just about anything on the internet. But as a regular law enforcement officer or FBI agent working a criminal case, even if it's a murder case, I'm not going to get that kind of information that you would see in that indictment or that the NSA would be able to get access to, mainly because the place that I'm searching, which is the company itself, like the VPN company, doesn't have that info to give me. So this certainly opens up a lot more questions about the capabilities of agencies like the NSA. But going back to that indictment, the thing I'm most surprised about is how revealing the indictment is about the capabilities, or at least you don't normally see that level of detail in a criminal indictment because it kind of tips the hand of what our government is capable of. The indictment's actually pretty interesting to read, so I will link to it in the show notes at writersdetective.com/30. And to be clear, this is not a leaked document. This is literally taking you to the official document available for download from the U.S. Department of Justice's website at justice.gov. But it's pretty fascinating to see all of the details that the FBI or Department of Justice has determined. I'm assuming it's the FBI. It could be any number of agencies working together. But that is not typical of what we would see in a criminal case. But if you happen to be writing some sort of thriller that's more in the international world or intelligence community kind of thing, just be aware that the NSA, CIA stuff is going to be very different than what we get when we're using a search warrant or a subpoena for criminal law and for evidence to be used in a criminal trial. In speaking of the show notes, I'll also include a few links to learning more about VPNs in general. The one VPN that I use myself personally is PIA, which is Private Internet Access is the name of the company. It was recommended to me by a cybercrime guru that was not only a cop and worked on an FBI cybercrime task force, but he was also a technical advisor on the show Mr. Robot. Now, I don't have approval to mention his name or anything, so I'm not going to go any further into that other than just to say that he knows his stuff and I trust his recommendation. And I've been a happy customer with PIA as my VPN. That's a lot of acronyms there. As I've been a happy customer with PIA as my virtual private network provider. So I do have an affiliate link for PIA, Private Internet Access VPN, which if you choose to use the link, I will get some sort of compensation for it. So I've creatively set up that link as writersdetectivebureau.com/VPN for virtual private network. So writersdetectivebureau.com/VPN. But in the show notes, you'll see a link to more details about how VPNs work, a story about how PIA's claims of not logging customer VPN access was actually proven to be true based on an actual FBI case, as well as a link about using VPNs with Tor. And if you've heard of Tor, T-O-R, it's an abbreviation for the onion router. So if you think of an onion and you're trying to peel it, you're peeling away layer after layer after layer. That's the same concept that's the concept that Tor is based around. So Tor is another network of computers used to obfuscate your real IP address. And the concept is similar to VPNs, I guess, in a sense, but it is a very different thing. Tor is certainly worth researching for your stories, especially if you want to write about the dark web, like online black markets like Silk Road. But huge word of caution, do not install Tor on your computer unless you really know what you're doing and you've taken some serious precautions. So do not install Tor. VPNs are something you pay for, and that's another thing. Definitely pay for your VPN. Don't use a free VPN service for obvious reasons. But yes, VPNs are good. Tor, you probably want to stay away from unless you really know what you're doing, because of the way that Tor, essentially, you become part of the Tor network, or your computer becomes part of the Tor network. So stay away from, research Tor, just don't install it on your computer. Okay, so getting back to more of Roz's questions. Yes, you can use VPNs on your phone. I have an iPhone, and as I mentioned, obviously, I use PIA. PIA has an app for you to download to your phone, and then you just enter your username and password. And then when you want to turn on your VPN, you open up the app, and it's literally like a big swipe screen of on and off. So I just swipe to on to activate, or swipe to off to deactivate my VPN connection. When I was in Grenada a few months ago, I used my VPN everywhere. I didn't get a SIM card when I was there. I wasn't really using my cell phone for phone calls. So I was relying on public Wi-Fi in a foreign country. And so I used my VPN in my hotel, at the airport, not only to encrypt my internet connection, but also to access some websites here in the States that would have locked me out if my IP address appeared to be from another country. So as a writer, if you're concerned about those, as Terry called it, guys in blue windbreakers knocking on your door because you keep searching for serial killers and cold cases and how to get away with murder, a VPN might be that added layer of anonymity that you're looking for. Will they really come knocking? Probably not. But do you want anyone on your Wi-Fi network, especially at the local coffee shop or at your local internet company, knowing what website you're accessing? Or do you want the websites you visit to see where you're located? Definitely not. So personally, I think we should be smart and encrypt our internet access with a VPN. If your antagonist does it, you probably should too. And I should also mention that VPNs are pretty affordable. I know with PIA, if you do a 2-year plan, it comes out to about, I think it's $2.91 US dollars a month. And all the encryption and IP address hiding aside, I actually found it a very affordable way to get my wife, to make my wife happy through binge watching her favorite BBC shows without getting the dreaded "you live in the wrong country" error message. With PIA, you get to choose and I'm sure it's the same with a lot of other VPN providers. I don't know how many servers other companies have, but with PIA, you get to choose the country and the region you want your IP address to be from. So that could be Los Angeles, New York, London, England, Melbourne, Australia. I mean, there are multiple IP locations in many, many countries. So they have a ton of countries and cities for your IP address to resolve to, which, I can almost hear the plot creation wheels turning in your guys' heads already. Anyway, links to hacker indictment, how VPNs work, and the story about the FBI not getting customer information from PIA are all in the show notes at writersdetective.com/30. And that affiliate link for PIA, if you are interested in signing up, is writersdetectivebureau.com/VPN. Thank you so much for the question, Roz. I would love to hear how this turns out for you. And this week's next question comes from Marco Carocari and marcocarocari.com. Marco is actually one of my latest Patreon patrons, so thank you very much for the support. I appreciate it, Marco. So Marco writes, first off, finally had a chance to tune into your podcast, and it is awesome. Well, thank you very much, Marco. I know you found me through Facebook, so glad you're listening to the podcast. So Marco goes on to say, you actually answered a lot of my questions I posted to you privately in Facebook in your very first episode. Thank you. It would be fantastic if you or your colleagues would be willing to weigh in on how they got to where they are today, which I am happy to do right now. So the questions are, what did you major in school, and did that have an impact in your decision to become a detective? At what age did you join law enforcement? Did you join the military, Navy, etc. before joining the police department, or did you hold a completely unrelated job first? Was the police academy easy or hard on you? And were there specific areas that you had difficulties with or excelled at? Has academy training of officers changed in the last 15 years? And if so, in which ways? Thank you for your time and help and for getting us answers so we can get it right. First of all, you are very welcome, Marco, and I'm glad to be able to share some of this. So I started in the criminal justice major initially, and as part of being just graduated from high school, raised by a single mom and trying to stay on her health insurance, I was going to a community college and majoring in criminal justice. But I had a 4-unit chemistry class that I, really needed to focus on because I'd not taken chemistry in high school. So I was looking for an easy A, to be honest. I'd already taken a bunch of criminal justice classes, and I enrolled in a reserve officer training course that essentially gave me all the units I need to stay considered a full-time student for health insurance. So I really focused on my chemistry class, got an A in that, but then at the same time, I got an A in this reserve officer, night school class. It was like 2 days a week, and then some Saturdays. And that, by finishing that class, I actually qualified. That was essentially considered reserve officer police academy. It's not something that they do anymore in the state of California now to become a reserve. And a reserve officer means that you're a volunteer. Now you have to go to a full, long police academy just to be a reserve officer. But back then, I took that class and qualified. And so I applied to the local police department to become a reserve officer and got accepted. And I was 21 years old when that happened. So I honestly didn't expect that to actually occur just because I was really young for that career. And I was brought on as a level 2 reserve officer, which meant that I could only work with a full-time police officer partner. I had supervision the entire time that I was volunteering as a reserve. So I had a badge and I had a gun, and you would not be able to tell the difference between me and my partner, who is the full-time guy. So I started my training that way. And did that for about 6 months before I was offered. I mean, I had to test, but it was in the era of the Clinton administration's community-oriented policing grants. This was in the mid-90s. So that grant funding essentially paid for a bunch of positions that our department would not have had otherwise. So that funding paid for me to go to the police academy. And when I came out and started patrol, I was 22 years old. So I started really young. I was, prior to that, I'd worked one short job doing security, actually 2 jobs doing security, one at the college and another one at a hospital. And then just after high school, I had also volunteered for the town that I grew up in, which is not where I work now. So I had exposure to law enforcement a little bit, separate from other, teenage type jobs. But this was really the first and only career that I've had. I considered joining the military, but I knew that I really wanted to go into law enforcement. So, and I obviously believe in public service, but I just kind of saw that the military time was going to essentially just delay my ability to get into my dream career. I was going to school with the intention of finishing my degree and then joining a federal agency, like becoming an FBI agent or Department of State or one of those things, Secret Service. I really wasn't sure. I had a lot of dreams as far as where I wanted to work at the federal level. But then when the reserve officer thing came about, I really fell in love with working at the local law enforcement level and getting involved in things that were pretty exciting. I mean, it was an adrenaline rush and I was 21, 22 years old. So I didn't want to go be at the whim of a federal agency and send me anywhere in the world that they wanted. I really enjoyed the work that I was doing. So I decided to stay at the local law enforcement level, especially when at 22 years old, the job was pretty much handed to me on a silver platter. I mean, I had to test, but I was invited, and that grant program made it a lot less competitive at that time for me to be able to do that. And I should mention that because I left school at age, 21, 22, I made it because essentially I was given a chance to pursue my dream job. I made a deal with my mom that I promised, if it was okay for me to leave school and start on my career path, that I would go back and finish my school. So about 10 years later, when I was a full-time detective, I then went back to college. I was actually a full-time student for a while there, but finished my degree through the Cal State University system in California. One of the things, though, that really made a difference with me becoming a detective, because I made detective with only 2.5 years on after becoming a full-time officer, but 2.5 years roughly into my career, after graduating from the police academy, I became a detective, which was really young. I was 24. But really the biggest difference that set me apart, or at least got me that position, was my command of the English language when it came to writing. So much of what you do as a detective is written. It's the arrest reports, it's the interviews, it's documenting all of those things, writing search warrants, that if you can't write well, you are not going to excel as a detective. And one of the ways you're selected is based on your report writing. So when you're a patrol officer and you're writing that auto burglary report, what you put into that report, how you articulate things, is going to be read by those detectives, and they will categorize reports as either detective worthy or not detective worthy. So when it comes time to promote, and they're going to know who writes great reports. So that was one of the things. I was not an English major in school, but it was one of the I was definitely more of an English guy than a math guy for certain. So English was one of the areas, at least as far as my writing, maybe not in my talking on podcasts, but writing was definitely one of the things that made me a viable candidate for the detective position. So when people ask me, what can I do to prepare for a career in law enforcement, especially if it's at the federal level, I mean, anybody can learn the criminal justice stuff. As I mentioned, they're going to teach that to you in the police academy. Being able to write, having the command of the English language is going to be a huge benefit to your career. And it's pretty common for cops to either come straight out of the military or get hired rather young with just a high school diploma, or, late 80s, early 90s, at least in California, real big strides were made to treat this as a profession rather than a job. And so there are a lot of agencies that require a bachelor's degree. Pretty much all of your federal agencies require a bachelor's degree to be an 1811, a criminal investigator job class, which would be your special agent job in the FBI or Secret Service, that kind of thing. But for local law enforcement, there are a lot of agencies that provide educational pay incentives and even pay for books and tuition for schooling. So it is quite common for the cops that started their career with only a high school diploma to go back and get their bachelor's degree and their master's degree, especially now with online schools. There's a lot of opportunity for going back to school, and honestly, to be competitive at a higher level in the career, as far as progressing through the ranks to command level, you do have to have a master's degree. That would be the normal educational career path. So if you didn't already get your bachelor's and go into the career, it will certainly behoove you to go back to school and finish. And that can be quite the struggle and the juggle to try to finish a bachelor's degree while you're working full time. And then if you have a family, it's even tougher. But a lot of cops are doing it right now, especially for the master's degrees. So yeah, I went back to school and got my bachelor's. And then when I pretty much came to the decision that I did not want to be a supervisor or go into management, then it really didn't give me any real incentive to pursue my master's. Doesn't mean I won't sometime later in life, but if I do, it's not going to be in anything having to do with law enforcement. The police academy, because I had already been through reserve officer training and had been going to college taking criminal justice courses, a lot of the things in the police academy that hang up a lot of the cadets or the recruits, I had already learned. So I already knew a lot of the penal code sections that you have to memorize. I already understood the laws of evidence. I was one of those weird guys in school where it's like I took an evidence class where all we did was study the evidence code, and I was fascinated by it. That was kind of one of the indicators that I was in the right field, or anybody else. It's like, oh man, pretty boring stuff. But it was one of those things that just I really gravitated towards. So when you're in the police academy, you're learning all of these things. It's kind of like taking boot camp from the military and adding a college level learning environment on top of that. So you're doing the running and the push-ups and shaving your head and getting yelled at and all that stuff. But then you're also expected to learn tons of law, whether that's learning the statutes. You're learning the statutes, but you're also having to learn case law. So you're learning constitutional law. You're learning the penal code, the vehicle code, the evidence code, the harbor navigations code. You name it. There are tons of code sections you're learning. You're learning radio codes. So you're getting all of this stuff thrown at you. And so the more detailed and harder things weren't quite as tough for me because it wasn't the first time that I was experiencing them. The other thing I guess the hardest thing about the police academy was that it was Groundhog Day. It was that you did the same thing over and over every single day. You saw the same people, ate the same food, got yelled at by the same people, ran the same, laps, did the same push-ups. The only thing that really changed was whatever it was you were learning. And that consisted, obviously there were changes. Like as the police academy progresses, you go from learning to demonstrating. You go to running scenarios and, proving that you can do this job. But the academy, for me, it was 6 months long, and it just felt, and when you're going hour by hour, because you can't even look to the end of the week just because everything was so intense. And it was a high stress academy, that, it definitely, is a unique environment. I'll put it that way. The difficulty was just essentially wrapping your brain around the fact that this was going to go on every single day not every single day. We had the weekends off. So that kind of messed with us even harder in the sense that you had to willingly go back to this on Monday morning again. But dealing with that over and over again. And academy training definitely has changed in the last 15 years. Obviously, their laws change, the case laws change, different mandates come in as far as new training topics that need to be presented, as far as priorities and new laws and that kind of thing. But one of the biggest things that I've seen is that most of the police academies, certainly the one that I went to, is no longer a high stress academy. There's certainly stress involved, but it's not high stress. And the reason why that's important, at least in my opinion, is that there's a certain inoculation that happens with a high stress environment where, this may be the first time in your life that you're getting yelled at and it's not malicious. I mean, you're not getting hit. You're not getting sworn at because they teach you in the same standard as to what you're expected to do out in the field. If you're not allowed to swear when you're working as a patrol officer, they're not going to be swearing at you. Are you allowed to hit somebody? No, they're not going to hit you. It's all psychological. But when someone's in your face challenging you on your answer or on your decision on essentially the whole being of why you are there, if you're going to vapor lock and not be able to give an answer, if you're going to cry, if you're going to succumb to that stress, maybe this isn't the career for you. And if it's the first time that it's happening, it's not that you can't do that. It's just that in a closed training environment where everything is controlled and all of that stress is not real, you're not squared off with a gangster and being surrounded by gang members that are armed. You want that failure point to that learning lesson, that stress to come out in a training environment, not when your life is actually threatened. You want to learn how to emotionally control yourself a lot better. And one of the ways that happens is by being exposed to that higher level of stress. So that's one of the things that I think has changed. The other is that as we are given more tools like the taser or the beanbag shotgun, these less lethal tools, the newer cops that are coming out on the street seem to rely upon them more. So I was brought into the career in a day and age where you still had to talk to people and de-escalate situations because you didn't have a taser. I mean, back then, pepper spray was relatively new. You couldn't just solve a problem by tasing somebody. And that's not necessarily the way you solve a problem, but I certainly see younger cops relying upon the tools on their belt to solve a situation rather than dealing with it on a more personal level. And if it does get to the point where you do need to go hands-on with somebody, if you're relying upon this little plastic electrical, taser to take someone into custody, what are you going to do if this is the first time where your taser doesn't work, or this is the first time where the guy just doesn't respond to being tased, and now you actually have to go hands-on with a guy, wrestle with him, take him to the ground, use your baton, use pepper spray. If you've never done those things before, it's going to be an eye-opening experience. So it's not about being tough. It's about being smart, and it's about doing the right thing. And if you're relying on these, technical tools to get it done, then you're not really doing the job in the way that you should be. And that is, dealing with people, connecting with people, and solving problems. So I guess that would be the thing that I've seen change the most in the last 15 years. So thank you for the questions, Marco. I appreciate it. And thank you for becoming a patron. You can find Marco at marcocaracari.com. Well, this episode ran a little bit longer than I was expecting, but thank you for listening to episode number 30 of the Writers Detective Bureau podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe. It's free and it makes sure that it gets downloaded to your device as soon as it's available. So if you belong to a writers group in person or online, I would love it if you shared this podcast with that group. And remember, this podcast is created for you, so don't be shy. Submit your crime fiction questions or just say hello by going to writersdetective.com/podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Have a great week and write well.